Welcome to Crash Course in Commercial Real Estate. We converted our in-house training program to a podcast to teach you prospecting, negotiation, business planning, and other fundamental skills to become a successful commercial real estate agent. And now, here's your host, Brady Collier.
All right, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about what is commercial real estate brokerage. So some watching this may be wondering what exactly is commercial. In a future episode, we're going to talk about the differences between commercial real estate and residential real estate. But today we're going to just look at commercial real estate. It's a really, really big industry. So I've got Kyle again with me, and of course we're training Shannon, which we introduced to you in the previous episode. And so Kyle, today we want to talk about not the industry, but the actual job itself. So we want to talk about landlord rep, tenant rep, investment sales. In the next several episodes, I'm going to break down all of the different segments. So if you could define what is commercial real estate, how would you define it as an occupation? Like, what do we do?
So in commercial real estate, it would be any transaction that revolves around the people's businesses in the commercial world rather than, on contrast, residential real estate, which is what most people have exposure to because they bought or sold or leased a house. It would be in contrast to that. So residential real estate, with the exception being multifamily, which is residential, but it's more on the investing side of multifamily. So any transaction of business, of somebody's desire to invest or to find a location for their business or...
Shannon, my definition, and I didn't Google this, I should have prior to this, would be
too.
anything that would be an income-producing asset. And so as we talk about hospitality and hotels and apartment complexes and industrial warehouses and retail shopping centers and specialty things like golf course, the reason everybody owns those things in the end is because they want to make money. So it's income-producing assets. So residential is where people live, houses, condos, townhomes, etc. And we won't ever do any of those your entire career because we are a commercial only. And then we'll get into commercial because that's a really big industry. There's a lot of ways people make money with commercial real estate. And so, as Kyle mentioned yesterday, our company primarily, it started in the retail and restaurant space, and that's what Kyle does. And the next episode is going to be specifically on that niche within the industry. The next several episodes, we're going to talk about apartment complexes with some friends of mine who sell apartments. And we're going to talk about office and industrial, which are oftentimes lumped together. We'll talk about the land brokerage and specialty. And a few other, but today I want to focus more on Kyle and your business and what you've learned about it as a profession. So let's start with there are commercial real estate agents, even though the licensing that you just went through is the same. There are agents who focus on representing tenants and landlords, and that's a very different business than representing owners, buyers and sellers of income producing property. So let's start by contrasting those two.
Right.
So do you want to give an overview of large contrast between those two?
Sure.
As an occupation? Like, what would be differences in your daily work? What would be pros and cons? However you want to take it from there.
That's right. And again, comparing it to residential is often helpful because people are familiar with it and they've had touch points on it. And so in residential, you have listing brokers, which would be your landlord reps, and then you'd have buyer representatives, which would be your tenant rep. So same thing. So a landlord rep is going to spend most of his time going out and prospecting on landlords to list their properties, to find vacant shopping centers with vacancies so that they could list their property and put it up. And then they will prospect and call tenants to fill those spaces. So they're building an inventory base in some specialty. Maybe for myself, that's retail. For others, it might be office space or industrial or selling shopping centers. And so they're going to represent landlords to lease their shopping centers.
Let me interrupt you there and let me ask you a question. Is their prospecting the reality? So their pitch towards landlords may be that they're calling on tenants all the time. But the core of their business, are they really prospecting on tenants if they're a landlord rep, or are they really prospecting on more landlords to add more inventory to the market?
Yeah, so both and, right? A good listing landlord rep is going to be doing both. But early on, when you don't have any inventory, you have to be calling tenants. But really strong landlord reps, they may have 50 shopping centers listed in Lubbock, Texas, for example. And so at that point, they're just going to be fielding the calls of everybody that's interested in the market and placing them in the appropriate center that fits.
So the goal of, if you're doing landlord representation, your real goal for your career is to have as much inventory on the shelves as possible. Just think about it when you walk into a grocery store. You walk into a grocery store, what you expect is tons and tons and tons of inventory. And then you can just go and people just take the inventory off the shelves. In this recent inventory crisis caused by the pandemic, you walk in and sometimes there's no inventory on certain shelves and you're like, how are they going to make money if they're not selling things? So if your business goes in the direction of representing landlords, and we could say the same, not only of landlords, but sellers of commercial real estate. So
anything you'd list for sale or lease.
For sale or lease. And the business of the sale and the lease is different. The way you manage is different, such as that. We'll get into that in a sec. But your primary goal for your business is to add more and more and more and more inventory to the market, and you control that inventory. And Kyle, why is it a benefit to Shannon to control more inventory?
Yeah, it's money on the shelf. I mean, it's money ready to be put in your pocket. At some point, that space needs to be leased, and if you do your job and you find tenants for those spaces, you'll eventually profit.
So Kyle does some landlord rep, but he also does tenant rep.
Right.
So he represents several tenants that are expanding. So Kyle, the benefit to a landlord rep is when you Kyle does the landlord rep for South Plains Mall right here behind us. And anytime somebody comes to Lubbock, Texas, and they want to do a ground lease like Uncle Julio's right there, they have to call Kyle because he controls that inventory. So when other concepts want it, you control the inventory. So that adds a stability to your income. It adds a stability to your life. Your phone is ringing with incoming cash. And so the benefit of landlord rep or having a lot of buildings out there on the market for sale is you've tied them up on a listing agreement, just like a house. If you sold a house before, 6 months, 12-month listing agreement, it auto renews. And if you're doing a good job, they keep you on. And other brokers are bringing you leases. Other brokers are bringing you contracts. You just negotiate those. And so sometimes you'll put it on the market. You'll have 4 or 5 tenant reps bring you deals, and it's easy. It's easy money. So that sounds like a great gig, right?
Yes.
But yet Kyle has. Go ahead.
And to build on that, I would say greater than 50% of my deals on the landlord rep side, they don't end up leasing space in the property they call on potentially because they may see something that they like. South Plains Mall, for example, very expensive ground lease. They call, hey, we'd love to put a restaurant on South Plains Mall. I quote them the rate. Not a fit at all. Well, are you looking for second generation restaurant space? Would you want to be in Southwest Lubbock? And then that problem solving we talked about in a different episode, you can connect the pieces and put the puzzles together and solve their problem to find something in your inventory that's a fit for that tenant.
And Kyle's business actually started in landlord rep because we have Wheelhouse Development. He was representing Wheelhouse as a landlord rep on our spaces. But Kyle, he's now got all these tenant rep assignments because they called on our space, some end cap on a shopping center, and they wanted to put a drive-through restaurant on there. But it wasn't a good fit because it was a 2,400 foot end cap and they needed 1,800. And Kyle's like, well, what about this? And he converted that into a tenant rep assignment. So when you have the inventory and you're getting the calls, you're not just getting them from other brokers in Dallas and Austin and Houston and Lubbock and so on. You're also getting calls direct from the tenants. So the people who have the inventory, they control the knowledge of the market and what tenants are looking to expand and so on and so forth. So a good benefit, not only do people call you and you make money, but another benefit is you're in the know of what's going on in the market and you find other clients through your inventory control. So that's a great benefit of being a landlord rep. But yet, you have chosen to move a large portion of your business into representing a few key tenants, and you are their tenant rep. And
That's right.
So you had to have had a reason for doing that. So tell me some of the benefits of tenant rep. Why do you like to represent tenants?
Right. So tenant rep, and that would be buyer rep as well. So if someone needs to go acquire real estate or to lease real estate, you're going to represent them in that market by helping them find the site that fits their needs. And so I think on the landlord side, there can be a lot of waiting or trying to find a solution that may not exist on a very challenging space. But when you have a tenant ready to do locations, or a buyer that has money that they need to invest, especially in a 1031 exchange, which is a tax advantage that they may be looking for, whatever it might be, you're in control at that point. You have somebody ready to make a decision, and generally landlords love to have those conversations. So it's fun to go hunt those sites for a tenant or business owner that's ready to expand.
So Kyle's got several tenants, and let me just say, Kyle walks into the room and he's the prettiest girl at the prom because everybody wants to be his date. I mean, no offense.
Trying to translate that to every area of life.
Yeah. So he represents a tenant. Maybe it's a 35,000 foot box tenant, and there's all this box vacancy across the United States right now because all of these big boxes have shut down because of Amazon and because of COVID and so on and so forth. These guys are desperate to fill this box. So it may be a vacant box at Slide in the Loop kind of location, but in Temple or Tyler or St. Augustine or Denver. And Kyle has the tenant that fits it. So they're courting those big tenants. And so Kyle, in some cases, as a tenant rep, holds all the cards because multiple people want him as a tenant. And he knows his tenant, maybe it's a restaurant that he represents that's a 1,800 foot end cap. He knows they're going to do 7 locations in the market. So when they identify a market, they've got the funding, they're ready to go. With a landlord rep assignment, you may be holding a vacant space for 6 months or 6 years for really hard spaces to fill. Awkward space.
Hopefully not, but it happens.
It happens. But with a tenant rep assignment, if they have the funding to go open 6 restaurants or whatever it may be, and that would apply across retail, office, industrial. If you have a big oil company and you control them as a tenant rep and they're going into Midland, Texas, they're going to lease a warehouse and an office space there. It's just a matter of which one. And so the timeframes on tenant rep can be very short because you can find that, identify the spot, negotiate the lease on behalf of your tenant with the landlord, and it can be really quick money. And the income can be amazing on a tenant rep. And the income can be great on a landlord rep, but a lot of times you have lots and lots and lots of small checks. Tenant reps can either be small checks or can be very, very, very large ones.
Right. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, but I had somebody ask me a few days ago, what's riskier, landlord rep or tenant rep? And it's not a clear answer. His assumption was landlord rep would be more risky because of the tenant. You have them ready to expand. But then we have a pandemic that shuts down restaurants, shuts down fitness centers. And so the faucet turns off with expansion. So on landlord rep, the shopping center is always there. You know, the bricks and sticks remain and the landlord has to do something. So I would say landlord rep's probably a little bit less risky because they have to do something to fill the space. And if you're good at solving a problem, you can help them come up with a creative solution to that space. It may be at a much reduced rent, so it might not be the income it was going to be, and it may take 12 months to fill instead of 2. But tenants can go away in a second. Tenants can go bankrupt, and landlords can too, but the shopping center remains.
Or you could
so that's my thought on
or
which
you could
one.
be representing them in the state of Texas, and they're all in on Texas. I have a client recently I was representing, and they were all in on Lubbock. And all of a sudden, now they're all in on Dallas, and they put Lubbock expansion off for at least 12 to 24 months.
That's right.
And then as a rep, I'm out in the cold. I mean, I got nothing. Whereas landlord rep, the physical asset's here, so you control it.
They can't pick it up and move it.
You need to think about it all in regards to your time. And if you have a great tenant who's committed to doing a deal, then that's a great use of your time. If you have a landlord who's realistic on this, what they want for the property in terms of rent, that's a great use of your time. Let's transition and talk a little bit, though. It's a lot on tenants and landlords because that's the core of your business. Let's talk just a little bit about buyers and sellers because Kyle equated working with a tenant is like working with a buyer. Working with a landlord is like working with a seller. And that's a great way to think about it. But there are a few differences. Kyle, can you think of one or maybe 2 differences of representing buyers and sellers as opposed to representing tenants and landlords?
Yeah, there's quite a bit different. And one is how you're compensated. You know, you're compensated on the term of a lease. So they'll take a 5-year lease and multiply the full value and you're paid that way, as opposed to, you know, everybody can calculate pretty easily on a purchase and sale transaction. It's just on the purchase price.
Hold on. Would your gut be that you would make more money representing tenants or buyers on per transaction?
My gut says buyers.
Your gut could be right or could be dramatically wrong. Right?
Yeah, it's all across the board. So I did a lease.
Sorry,
it was
put you on the spot
signed
there,
or
but,
that was agreed to yesterday. That's a 3-year lease on a 1,500 square foot space. And so those are generally really small commissions because they're really short term.
Like $1,500.
Yeah, the commission was something like that.
Right.
That's right. As opposed to if I had sold that same piece of property, its value is probably, $100,000 or $150,000. So it would be 2 to 3 times more valuable to sell that building than to lease it because it was a short-term lease. Now, when you're working with national and regional tenants, they're generally agreeing to 10 to 15-year leases. And so, and they agree to a 10 to 15-year lease because they're asking for a lot from the landlord. The landlord will contribute tenant improvement allowance to help the tenant finish out their space. And I'm getting off topic a little bit, but the more you get from the landlord, the more rent they're paying. The more rent they're paying, the larger the value of this 10-year lease. And so, on a 30,000 square foot box, and there's one out the window back there, I don't know if they can see it, that 30,000 square foot box vacant is probably worth, $2 million or $2.5 million. So if you were to sell that building, you'd make somewhere between $60,000 and $75,000. But the lease value on that, when you get tenant improvement dollars from the landlord, is probably $12 to $13 a foot, which is $35,000 a month, which is $420,000 a year. And if they sign a 10-year lease, that's $4.2 million. So you're being paid a commission percentage on $4.2 million on a lease as opposed to $2 to $2.5.
Plus, there's also times you get renewals. If they renew that lease in 10 years, all of a sudden, if you negotiate it in, you may get a renewal check.
Yeah,
as
maybe,
a landlord, I don't want to pay that, but that happens.
Yeah, so you can negotiate that.
So the tenant side can be huge commissions. The landlord side can be huge commissions, but they're radically different. So that's one. Right. You close at a title company just like a house whenever you're closing deals with a buyer and a seller. But on a tenant and a landlord, that's not the case.
That's right. It's all done with leases and attorneys, and it's just between the tenant and landlord, and very rarely is there some third party involved like a title company because there's no transfer of the asset.
Let me say that on a technical basis, representing a landlord and a buyer, the liability or the technical ability, the knowledge base to do that is really not that high. We'll finish this training here in a few weeks, and I will have full confidence that we can go out and list buildings and help buyers buy those buildings because the due diligence is short. It's pretty easy. But that is not the case representing a landlord or a tenant on a lease form because the leases are oftentimes 50, 60 pages long, and every clause in that lease, and we're going to have some training on understanding lease forms, every single thing in that lease is a lawsuit waiting to happen. And so attorneys get involved early, often, and we're going to have one whole episode on who are our friends in the real estate business. We're going to find out that when you're doing lease deals, you have to have a great attorney because those leases are amazingly complex.
And time is our only asset as a broker. So
Yes.
we want to help our clients. We want to review the leases. We want to advise them. But if you're spending all your time in 50 and 60 page leases, helping consult them on that, you're sucking time away from where you can really bring them value and where your expertise is. And so, you don't want to spend all your time in leases.
So that's a high-level overview. I think we'll close it out there, but I want to take any questions that you may have. I'm going to recap. We represent landlords. We represent tenants. We represent buyers. We represent sellers. Some real estate agents you will meet, for example, we're going to Austin for this retail show. You will meet guys that have stopped doing everything else. They are only tenant reps, specialists in identifying sites for tenants. You will meet, I talked to a guy this morning making millions of bucks in the industry, and he says, I have given away all my buyers. And he has a lot of great buyers. He's handed them all off to other people in his office because he said, I'm only representing sellers from this point on because I'm just putting the inventory out there and I'm letting everybody else take it off the shelf. Too much time wasted on buyers who don't end up closing a deal. So you're going to find people running their lanes. And as we explore the industry, you're going to find what lane do I enjoy most. And a lot of people start as a generalist where they just do all the deals that they can find to do. And then they find what they like best and they do more and more of that. Would you agree?
Yeah. For sure.
So do you have that's a lot of information. Do you have any questions for us on
No,
that?
you answered my question was for a new person, where do you even turn to start? And it sounds like you start doing whatever you can and then you figure out which lane to get into. My biggest question, considering the pandemic and that we're still in, is, how is the inventory with what you're experiencing in businesses in this part of the country, and is it vastly different than what you're seeing in the rest of the country?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So this time last year, maybe it was getting a little better this time last year, because now it's September 1st. No, it's the end of August. It's the last day of August. So, but most of the middle of last year was negotiating rent deferrals and rent abatements for tenants, because fitness centers were closed, restaurants were closed, and they were all asking for something from the landlord. Help me. But everybody
Landlords
was
were negotiating with banks to try to get deferral on their payments, and so tenants aren't paying, so they can't pay, and it was just a really terrible time in the industry, really difficult.
But everything rebounded incredibly quickly. Kind of like the stock market rebounded quickly, commercial real estate rebounded really quickly as well. And right now in 2021, there's more demand than I've ever seen in my 5 or 6 years.
In my 20-year career, the cap rates are at their lowest now. In other words, people are paying more for properties today than they have any time in my 20 years in this business. And so it's a really great time to be in the business, because demand is really high. It's really strong.
There was a little window from like August to September, October, before everybody started making real estate decisions again last year, where I think there was really good deals for people that started moving a little bit quickly. You know, when the market's down, look for opportunity. And I had some clients that got some great deals in a very small window, because everybody expected that to last longer.
Right.
But now everything's really challenging.
So we're going to have future ones on how do you get started, and after we do, a short episode on multifamily, office, land, so on and so forth, we'll talk about choosing your lane, running in it. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, and so if you have follow-up questions on this, then we'll be here, and we can either take those up offline or in another episode.
Okay.
All right, sounds good.